They pointed at her chest before they ever looked at her eyes. They told her the SUV couldn't possibly be hers. Not out loud at first, but in the way Constable Grant Sylvester's mouth curled when he asked who she'd borrowed it from. They made an elderly woman stand on the gravel shoulder of Highway 17 in the July heat, while cars slowed down to stare. They had no idea the vehicle's onboard system had already sent a photograph to a phone 600 kilometers away. They had no idea that the man reading that photograph was a lieutenant colonel with the Canadian Armed Forces. 3 hours from home and closing the distance fast, and they certainly had no idea that by the time the sun went down, their whole detachment would be the subject of a federal investigation. This is what happened to Corinne Danladi and her mother-in-law Winifred on a Sunday that started with sweet corn and ended with a courtroom. The Ottawa Valley in July has its own kind of heat, thick, green, buzzing with black flies that seem to know exactly when you've rolled the windows down. Corinne had the air conditioning set low and the radio tuned to a Sunday gospel program out of Pembroke, and beside her, Winifred sat with her hands folded over her purse, humming along a half beat behind the singer the way she always did. "You're gripping that wheel like it owes you money," Winifred said, glancing sideways. "I'm just being careful with it," Corinne said. "Reuben would never let me hear the end of it if I put a scratch on this thing. He bought it so you'd stop worrying, not so you'd start worrying about the car instead of the road." Corinne laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came easier now that the worst of the deployment worry was behind her. Her husband, Lieutenant Colonel Corinne Danladi, had spent the last 7 months on a NATO rotation out of Latvia, and in 3 days he'd be home for good, or at least home enough, reassigned to a training post at CFB Petawawa, close enough that she wouldn't have to watch him disappear down the driveway every few months anymore. He'd leased the Genesis for her before he left, a dark green GV80 with more screens in it than her father's television, insisting she and his mother have something reliable for the long stretch of highway between Birch Hollow and the base. Corinne had told him it was too much car for a nurse and a retired schoolteacher. Reuben had told her that was exactly the point. They were headed to the farmer's market in Deep River, then on to the base commissary to pick up sweet corn and the ingredients for the welcome home dinner Winifred had been planning for 2 weeks. Jollof rice, fried plantain, a pepper soup that would make Reuben cry a little, the way it always did. Winifred had brought a cooler for the corn. She'd also brought her Bible, out of habit more than anything, tucked into the outer pocket of her purse, the way she'd carried it every Sunday for 40 years. The road narrowed past Birch Hollow, a town of maybe 4,000 people that existed mostly to service the highway and the base 30 kilometers beyond it. It was the kind of place where everyone recognized the local cruisers on site, and where a dark green luxury SUV with Ontario plates and out-of-town faces behind the wheel was, to certain eyes, an event. Constable Grant Sylvester was one of those eyes. He was 31, built like a man who spent more time at the gym than at his desk, and parked that morning behind the Tim Hortons sign on the edge of town, nursing a coffee that had gone lukewarm an hour ago. Beside him sat Constable Melissa Yarrow, 4 months out of the Ontario Police College, still young enough to laugh at Sylvester's jokes a half-second too eagerly. "Dead morning," Yarrow said, scrolling through something on her phone. "Give it time," Sylvester said. "Sunday traffic through here is either church people or people running from something." Then the Genesis rolled past, and Sylvester sat up so fast his coffee sloshed onto his knee. "Would you look at that? Nice ride," Yarrow said. "That's a GV80, 75 grand easy." Sylvester was already pulling out, letting 3 cars pass before he fell in behind it. "Tint's dark. I'd bet it's past legal." He closed the distance slowly, the way he liked to, and when the morning light hit the windshield just right, he got his first clean look at the 2 women inside. "Well, well," he said, his voice dropping into something lazy and pleased with itself. "Would you look at that?" "What?" Yarrow squinted. 2 of them in there, neither one under 60, from the look of it. He tapped the wheel. "And they don't exactly scream $75,000 SUV, if you follow me." "You think it's stolen?" "I think a couple of grandmas from wherever they're from, driving something like that through here, is worth a closer look." Sylvester reached for his lights. He hadn't run the plate. He hadn't checked for a theft report. He'd decided everything he needed to know from a glance through tinted glass. The blue and red lights bloomed in the rearview mirror, and Corinne felt her stomach drop the way it always did, reflexively, the way it had since she was 16. "Oh Lord," Winifred murmured. "I wasn't speeding," Corinne said, checking the display. "I was doing 61 in a 60. "Just pull over," Winifred said, her hand finding Corinne's arm. "It's probably nothing." Corinne eased onto the gravel. Her hands weren't shaking yet, but they were close. She'd had the talk with her own children, the same way her father had given it to her. Hands where they can see them, no sudden moves. Yes, officer. No, officer. And some part of her had hoped that a base 30 kilometers up the road, and a husband with a rank that commanded respect anywhere else in the country, might have bought her some kind of exemption from needing to remember it. It hadn't. Sylvester took his time getting out. He adjusted his belt. He put his sunglasses on, though the sky was half clouded. He walked to the driver's window with the loose, rolling swagger of a man who had never once had a stop go sideways on him, and rapped knuckle against the glass, hard, twice. Corinne lowered the window. "Good morning, officer. Was I speeding?" He didn't answer right away. He leaned down, looked past her at Winifred, then back. "License and registration. Lice is in my purse. Registration's in the glove box. I'm going to reach for them now." "Don't reach for anything yet." He straightened up. "Whose vehicle is this? My husband's. He leased it for us. He's with the Canadian Armed Forces. Sylvester laughed, short and dry. "Sure he is. Step out of the vehicle." "Officer, is there a reason?" I said, "Step out." He pulled the door open himself. Yarrow mirrored him on the passenger side, opening Winifred's door with a little more hesitation, but the same instruction. "Both of you, out." "What have we done?" Winifred asked, her voice trembling in a way that made something in Corinne's chest go hot and cold at once. "Failure to comply is what you're doing right now," Sylvester said. "Hands on the hood, both of you." Corinne climbed out slowly, one hand still braced on the doorframe, and did as she was told. Winifred, 68 years old and unsteady on her knees at the best of times, was guided, pushed, really, though he'd deny it later, toward the hood of the SUV, her purse clutched against her chest. "This is unnecessary," Corinne said, trying to keep her voice level. "My husband is a lieutenant colonel. If you call—" "I don't want to hear about your imaginary husband," Sylvester said, patting her down roughly, pulling her wallet from her jacket pocket and flipping it open. "Corinne Danladi, tell me, Corinne, what's a home care nurse doing in a car that costs more than most people's houses?" "I told you. My husband. The lieutenant colonel." "Right." He tossed the wallet onto the hood, close enough to the edge that it nearly slid off. "Or maybe lieutenant colonel is code for something else." Winifred gasped audibly. "How dare you? That's my son you're talking about." "Quiet." Sylvester circled the vehicle, peering through the windows at the interior, the cooler in the back seat, the market bags. "Yarrow, run the plate. Take your time. I want to see what else is in here." Traffic on the highway slowed as it passed, the way it does, at every roadside stop, faces turning to watch, two women stand, with their hands pressed to the hood of an SUV on a Sunday morning. A minivan slowed almost to a stop, and Corinne saw a child in the back seat, pointing before a parent pulled the vehicle's attention forward again. The shame of it landed somewhere low in her stomach and stayed there. "Officer." Corinne tried again, quieter this time. "If you'd just let me show you the registration, you'll see. If you mention that husband one more time, I'm putting you in cuffs for obstruction." Sylvester stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "You fit a profile, ma'am. Expensive vehicle, no obvious means, story that doesn't add up." "What profile is that?" Corinne said, and she wasn't asking anymore. Something in his face shifted, some mask sliding a half-inch to the side. "What's your tone?" "I'm standing still. You're being combative." He unclipped his cuffs. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "No," Winifred said, stepping forward despite Yarrow's hand on her arm. "She's done nothing. You'll hurt her wrists, she's got." "Ma'am, stay back," Yarrow said, though her voice had lost most of its conviction. The cuffs closed tight around Corinne's wrists, biting harder than they needed to. She bowed her head against the warm metal of the hood and thought absurdly of Ruben's voice telling her 3 days, baby, 3 more days, and prayed the way her mother-in-law had taught her, quietly and without asking for anything specific, just for strength enough to get through the next 5 minutes. That was when the sound of an engine cut through the highway noise. Not a passenger car, but something heavier, a deep diesel growl that grew louder by the second. A charcoal grey pickup, mud still crusted on the wheel wells from a base training exercise, came off the highway and onto the shoulder fast enough to kick gravel against the police cruiser's bumper. It stopped hard, 15 feet back. Great, Sylvester muttered. Yarrow, tell him to keep moving. But the driver didn't wait for instructions. The door opened, and a man stepped down, tall, broad through the shoulders, in a way that filled out his plain grey t-shirt, without trying to, his head shaved close. Moving with the unhurried, deliberate walk of someone who had never once needed to run to get people's attention. He didn't look at Sylvester first. He looked at his mother's face, and then at his wife, cuffed against the hood of the car he'd bought her for exactly this kind of protection. And something in his jaw went tight and still. "Hey!" Yarrow called, stepping out. "This is an active stop. You need to get back." He kept walking. "Sir!" Sylvester's hand dropped to his holster. "I said stop right." He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that Sylvester had to tip his chin up slightly to hold eye contact. He reached into his back pocket, slow and visible. Hands. Yarrow's weapon came halfway out. Hands. What came out was a leather ID wallet, flipped open to reveal a photo, a Canadian Armed Forces crest, and a rank that made Yarrow's stomach drop before she'd even finished reading it. "Lieutenant Colonel Corinne Danladi," he said, voice low and level in a way that was somehow louder than shouting. "That's my wife you have in cuffs, and that's my mother you've had standing on a highway shoulder for the last 10 minutes. Take them off. Now." Sylvester's ego recovered faster than his good sense. Anyone can print a card at a copy shop. Step back before you're joining them. Danladi didn't step back. He didn't so much as blink. "Pick up the ID. Excuse me. You're going to drop it in the dirt in about 4 seconds because it makes you feel powerful. And then I'm going to ask you to pick it up because that card is Government of Canada property and you are not authorized to damage it." He let a beat pass. "Pick it up." Sylvester's hand had already started the motion, the same reflexive contempt that had gotten him this far, without ever once being questioned. And the ID hit the gravel before he caught himself, a half-second too late to pretend it was an accident. Danladi bent, retrieved it, and didn't look away from Sylvester's face the entire time. Grant," Yarrow started. "Maybe we just run the name if he's really—" "Shut up, Yarrow." Sylvester's face had gone a deep, blotchy red. "He's obstructing. Aggressive posture. I feel threatened. I am standing with my hands visible, checking on my 70-year-old mother, who has a knee replacement and has been forced to stand in that position for 10 minutes, Danladi said. "If she collapses, that is on you personally, and I promise you, I will make it puff my life's work to see that it costs you everything you have. That's a threat. That is a promise, and there's a difference, though I understand the distinction may be new to you." He turned his back on Sylvester's hand, hovering over the taser, a calculated insult, a display of a confidence Sylvester could never match, and crossed to Winifred first. "Mom, look at me. You okay?" "I told them, Reuben," she said, her voice cracking. "I told them your rank, I told them. I know, Mom, I know." He turned to Corinne, still cuffed, her wrists already swelling red where the metal had bitten in. Something moved behind his eyes, fast and dark, and was gone just as quickly, folded down under the same discipline that had carried him through 2 combat tours. "Yarrow, you're the secondary officer here. You have a positive duty to intervene if your partner is using excessive force on a compliant subject." "This is that moment." Yarrow looked at Sylvester. Sylvester's jaw worked. "Don't you touch those cuffs," Sylvester snapped, reaching for his radio instead. "Dispatch, this is Unit 6-2. I need backup on 17. Mile marker, near Birch Hollow turnoff. Multiple subjects. One large male making military claims. Situation is escalating." Danladi didn't raise his voice. "There is no situation. There is a lawful stop that you turned into an unlawful one the moment you decided 2 black women in a nice vehicle meant probable cause." "I smell marijuana," Sylvester said suddenly, and the words landed with the particular ugliness of something rehearsed. Strong, coming from the vehicle. Yarrow's eyes flicked involuntarily to the spotless interior, to Winifred's Bible sitting in the open purse on the hood. "You smell it too, right, Yarrow?" A long pause. "Ah, yeah," she said finally, looking at her boots. "I smell it. There it is," Sylvester said, something like triumph in his voice now. "Probable cause. We searched the vehicle. And since you're claiming to own it, Colonel, that includes you." Danladi didn't move. Instead, he lifted his wrist and tapped the face of his watch. "Since I parked, this truck's dash system has been recording video and audio, cloud-synced through the base network. My mother's phone has a line open to the RCMP non-emergency line, has for the last 6 minutes. And this vehicle," he nodded toward the Genesis, has a connected safety feature that photographs the cabin and cargo area anytime it's accessed by someone other than the registered driver while parked roadside. It already sent a notification to my phone. Twice. Sylvester's face flickered. The first real crack in it. You're bluffing. Go ahead and find out. It should have ended there. A reasonable man would have found a reason to apologize and let the cuffs come off before the situation calcified into something with paperwork attached. Sylvester was not, on that particular Sunday, a reasonable man. He ordered Yarrow to cuff Danladi too, and when the second cruiser arrived, followed shortly by a third, then a supervisor's SUV, the shoulder of Highway 17 had become a small, chaotic blockade of flashing lights that slowed traffic for a kilometre in either direction. Sergeant Roy Pemberton arrived heavyset and unhurried, 30 years on the job and a belief, worn smooth like a river stone, that his officers were right until proven otherwise. He listened to Sylvester's version, luxury vehicle, evasive answers, a large aggressive male making unverifiable military claims, the smell of marijuana, and looked over at Corinne, wrists raw, and Winifred, weeping quietly by the guardrail, and at Danladi, cuffed but standing with a stillness that unsettled him more than any amount of shouting would have. "You the husband?" Pemberton asked. "Lieutenant Colonel Reuben Danladi, Canadian Armed Forces. I am currently being unlawfully detained. My wife has visible injuries from excessive restraint, and my mother is a senior citizen who was made to stand on gravel for the better part of 15 minutes for no lawful reason." Pemberton's mouth tightened. He'd seen enough lawsuits in 30 years to recognize the shape of one forming in real time. "Sylvester, get the cuffs off his wife. Now." "Sarge, she was." I said now. Sylvester complied grudgingly, and Corinne's wrists came free, angry red welts already rising on the skin. Pemberton turned back to Sylvester. "Talk to me about this marijuana strong smell. Coming from the back." "It's clean," Danladi said, "but he's going to find a way to make it not clean." I watched him reach toward his vest before he went for the trunk. That's a hell of an accusation against a sworn officer. It's an observation. Search the vehicle then. Let's see. Pemberton nodded at Sylvester, who pulled on a pair of gloves with a little too much ceremony and popped the rear hatch. He tossed aside the market bags, dug through the cooler, scattered the contents of the cargo net across the floor of the trunk. Winifred's Bible landed face down on the pavement. He lifted the cargo floor panel, and for a long moment there was only the sound of highway traffic and Sylvester's breathing. Then he straightened, holding up a small, rust-flecked revolver by the trigger guard. "Found it," he announced, "under the storage panel. Serials filed off." "That's not ours," Corinne said, her voice rising for the first time. "I have never seen that gun in my life." Danladi closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he opened them, his voice was almost gentle, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. "Constable, you've made a mistake. The only mistake was your family thinking a badge doesn't apply to them. The mistake," Danladi continued, "is that you don't know this vehicle. The GV80's cargo floor doesn't have a storage well. It's a flat battery pan for the hybrid assist system, sealed, with a single access point that requires a tool to open, and it logs every single time it's accessed, with a timestamp, synced to the manufacturer's app." He let that sit. "There is no version of this where you found anything under that panel in under 10 seconds without a screwdriver, and there is absolutely no version where the app on my phone doesn't already have a photograph of exactly what that compartment looked like when you opened it." Sylvester went very still. "Sarge," Danladi said, not looking away from Sylvester now, "check my phone. It's in my truck. There will be a notification, a photograph, timestamped 4 minutes ago." Pemberton's jaw tightened. He walked to the truck himself, found the phone on the passenger seat, and stared at the screen for a long moment before he turned it around so Sylvester could see it too. A photograph of an empty, undisturbed cargo panel, dust-free and clearly still sealed, timestamped 90 seconds before the gun had supposedly been found. "Grant," Pemberton said, and something in the way he used the first name made the temperature on that stretch of gravel drop by several degrees. "Where did that gun actually come from?" "It was in there, Sarge, I swear. I saw him take a rag out of his vest pocket before he leaned into that trunk," Yarrow said quietly. It was the first thing she'd said in almost a minute, and it cost her visibly to say it. "You lying little," Sylvester spun toward her, and Pemberton stepped bodily between them. "Enough. Sylvester, put the weapon down on the hood. That's an order." Sylvester didn't. His hand tightened on the grip instead, some final, desperate calculation running behind his eyes. That this could still be salvaged, that a badge and 30 seconds of nerve had gotten men out of worse. I'm not going down for this. I run this stop, Grant. Pemberton's voice had lost every trace of its earlier patience. Put it down. A car door closed somewhere behind them, unhurried, and a woman in the navy dress uniform of the Canadian Forces Office of the Judge Advocate General crossed the gravel with the kind of calm that only comes from already knowing how a scene ends. "Constable," she said. "I'd do as the sergeant says. My name is Major Odette Fanning, JAG. I've been on an open line with Lieutenant Colonel Danladi's mother for the last 11 minutes, and I've heard every word spoken on this shoulder, including the fabricated odor of marijuana. The false claim about that storage panel, and the moment you decided to manufacture evidence against a serving member's family." She glanced toward the horizon, where 2 more vehicles were approaching fast, RCMP markings visible even from a distance. The Sensitive and International Investigations Unit is about 4 minutes out. I'd use the time you have left wisely. The gun clattered onto the hood of the cruiser. Sylvester's hands went slack at his sides, the last of the bravado draining out of him, all at once, the way it does from men who have never once had to face a consequence they couldn't out-talk. By Monday morning, dashcam footage, leaked, redacted, but unmistakable, had made its way onto social media, and the hashtag Colonel Danladi was the top trend in the country by noon. Chief Owen Bellwether of the Birch Hollow Attachment spent that morning watching protesters gather on the lawn outside his station, chanting names that weren't his but felt increasingly like they might as well be. "How bad is it?" he asked his deputy. "Bad, Chief. RCMP's got the server room. They're pulling 5 years of Sylvester's dashcam footage, and Yarrow, talking, full cooperation, hoping for immunity." In an interview room down the hall, Constable Melissa Yarrow sat across from RCMP Sergeant Elias Thorncroft, a glass of water trembling in her hands. "I didn't want to do it," she said. "He was my training officer. He told me that's how it's done out here. If you don't find a crime, you make one, because the detachment needs the numbers." "Numbers," Thorncroft repeated. "Explain." "Seizures, vehicle forfeitures." He targeted people passing through, luxury cars, out-of-toners, people who looked like they had money but no local pull. "Plant something. Seize the vehicle under the civil forfeiture rules before charges even need to stick. There's a lot that gets sold off before anyone challenges it in court. And where do the vehicles go?" Yarrow's voice dropped almost to nothing. "There's an impound contractor, owned by Sylvester's brother-in-law. Some of them get stripped for parts. The nicer ones get refined and shipped out through the port of Montreal, sold overseas before anyone even notices they're gone. It wasn't one bad officer. It was a small, efficient theft ring wearing a badge, and Corinne and Winifred Danladi had simply been the first family in it with the resources and the timing to fight back. 3 months later, in a packed courtroom at the Ontario Superior Court of Justice in Ottawa, Crown Attorney Miriam Castellano stood before the jury in RV Sylvester and laid out a case that had grown far beyond one traffic stop. 22 victims. A ledger recovered from Sylvester's locker with names, dates, and dollar amounts, and a leaderboard, photographed on a whiteboard before it could be wiped, with Sylvester's own nickname scrawled at the top in red marker. Winifred sat in the gallery with her cane resting against her knee. Corinne sat beside her, wrists long since healed, but the memory of the cuffs still surfacing at odd moments, in traffic, at the sound of a siren 2 streets over. Reuben sat in his dress uniform, a quiet, immovable presence that the defense lawyer visibly avoided looking toward. The recording that ended it wasn't the dashcam. It was audio pulled from Sylvester's own cruiser, recorded moments before the stop, played for a silent courtroom. "Look at them," his voice said, tinny through the speakers. "They'll be lucky to find a lawyer before we've already got the car halfway to Montreal. Nobody's going to believe 2 nobodies over a badge." The jury took under 2 hours. "Grant Sylvester, you took an oath to protect people," the judge said at sentencing. "Instead, you built a career preying on them, and you very nearly destroyed a family who did nothing but drive down a highway on a Sunday morning." He was sentenced to 14 years, banned permanently from any law enforcement role in Canada, and ordered to pay restitution to every name in that ledger. Justice Selwyn Marsh, the local magistrate, who'd been signing off on the seizures without so much as reading the files, resigned within the week and was later removed by the Judicial Council. Chief Bellwether retired in disgrace before his own review could conclude. The following spring, on the empty lot beside the old feed store in Birch Hollow, ground broke on the Corinne and Winifred Danladi Community Justice Centre. Free legal aid for anyone who couldn't afford a lawyer, staffed in part by JAG reservists on their off-postings, funded by the settlement money the family hadn't wanted but decided, in the end, to put to use. The chief of the defence staff issued a formal statement. The detachment got new leadership, mandatory body cameras, and a civilian oversight board that actually had teeth. On the day of the ribbon cutting, a cruiser rolled slowly past the gathering crowd. The young constable behind the wheel didn't slow to stare the way officers once had. He lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in a small, quiet gesture of respect and kept driving. Winifred, cane in hand, no longer needing the wheelchair the doctors had once warned her about, watched him go. "We won," she said softly. "No, Mom," Reuben said, an arm around his wife, watching the crowd, the ribbon, the building that would carry his mother's and his wife's names long after anyone remembered Grant Sylvester's. "We changed something." It's a story that keeps happening in small towns along quiet highways, in places where a badge is trusted a little too easily, and a person's worth is measured, wrongly, by the car they're driving or the color of their skin. What happened to Corinne and Winifred could have ended in silence, the way so many of these stories do. It didn't, because someone showed up at the right moment with the truth on his side and the patience to use it properly. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always finds a way out, and subscribe to Voices of Courage so you never miss the next one. What would you have done in Reuben's place? Let us know in the comments below.